Nicolas Pepe is finally a Gooner. Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast. This is our third bit of content today. It's been a really busy day. I told you earlier on the live stream that I would be back this evening because we expected the announcement to be made. It finally has been made. Nicolas Pepe has signed for Arsenal. Big news, of course, coming out of North London. Now, I've got a very special guest joining me on this edition of the podcast. It's none other than Mark Man Bryans, a journalist over at the PA. How you doing, mate? Welcome to the Chronicles of a Gooner.
Thank you for having me, mate.
Pleasure is all ours, my friend. Your initial thoughts on the signing of Nicolas Pepe? It's finally been announced. It's kind of been in the pipeline for a few days, hasn't it? But we're finally there. What's your initial thoughts?
Yes, it feels like one we've all been waiting for some time. Whereas actually, in hindsight, you look at it, it was only really last Friday that it surfaced that Arsenal were in for him. I mean, his agent's been to Naples, and there was links with Manchester United, and then all of a sudden it was actually Arsenal are putting together a deal worth a club record fee that obviously they've had to structure it because of the finances, but it's one hell of a coup, and I don't think the fans will mind of having to wait till today to see the confirmation come through.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a massive signing. Arsenal have been crying out for a natural wide man for quite some time now. I don't think there's any question about that. We all kind of accept that maybe, Alex Iwobi is not quite up to it in that position. And there are questions, aren't there, really, whether that is actually should be his position. Henrik Mkhitaryan's played there again. He's not exactly set the world on fire. But the only kind of surprising thing is, from an Arsenal perspective, is the fact that we have opted to spend such a large amount of money, albeit over a period of time, on a player in a sort of area. When I know we talk about not having wingers, but when you look at Arsenal's problems last season, they were mostly defensively, weren't they? So why have Arsenal opted to do this as opposed to, going out and spending on a top quality defender, in your view?
I mean, it's a very good question, to be fair. But if you look at the results from last year in particular, and not if you don't watch every game, you might think it's obvious they need a centre back. I mean, there may still be one that comes in. I think most fans would be unhappy if there wasn't a defensive signing centrally before the window closes. But I believe from what I know from within the club, that actually what had happened is that the club's analysis team looked at the best way of improving the away form in particular. And they pinpointed the need for actually more pace and skill in attack as opposed to correcting anything in defence, which is why obviously for the majority of the summer we've seen Pepe and also Wilfried Zaha are the ones that have been targeted as a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense, but it still doesn't really, solve the issues that we've had last season. I know that this is a positive thing. I'm not in any way trying to say that it's not. Of course it is. We've got a player who, let's face it, Manchester United were after, Liverpool were after, Napoli were after, Bayern Munich were after, if you're to believe the report. So this is, like you said, it's a huge coup for Arsenal. But do you expect Arsenal to do any more business, Mark?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, I think you're right. I think fans are allowed to get excited when you break the club record for a player such as Pepe. Again, I think you're right that everyone will still have a little bit of trepidation if they go into the new season with the defence they've got. I think from murmurings that they will or have at least already potentially gone back with a third bid for Kieran Tierney, that he's someone that they seem very keen on. And obviously, having structured the finances for the Pepe deal, there still should be some left in the pot. Whether that then extends to a central defender as well, it might end up being we see a loan signing or a short-term deal or something like that. But I do think that there is just one needs added to that central defensive option before we kick off the season at Newcastle.
Absolutely. Just looking at the club announcement, they've broken the news it was around about half an hour ago now. Head coach Unai Emery said Nicolas is a highly rated and talented winger who was wanted by many of the top teams in Europe. Signing a top-class winger has been one of our key objectives in this transfer window, and I'm delighted he's joining. He will add pace, power, and creativity with the aim of bringing more goals to the team. And there's just some stats on the screen now. 22 goals last season for Lille, 11 assists. Only Kylian Mbappe has a more combined Liga and goals and assists last season. This is a really, really top player that Arsenal have gone and got, isn't it?
100%. I mean, you don't get linked to those clubs. You don't have to be purchased for that amount of money. Arsenal, it's not like he suddenly emerged as a target for Arsenal last week as a sort of panic buy. They've clearly done their homework. We'll never know. Maybe Wilfried Zaha was the top target, and they realised that actually they couldn't afford it because Palace wanted money straight up. But even if he's the second choice, what a second choice to have. You look at those stats there, and you can't question it. Okay, you could say Liga and is of a different standard, but he's going to be coming in and playing with players like Aubameyang and Lacazette. So with all due respect to his teammates at Lille, he's coming in to play with better players as well, isn't he?
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right there. I think that maybe Wilfried Zaha was the first target. Maybe that's why we heard about those sort of links earlier on in the window. But I think you're absolutely right. Again, when you say that it's probably because Arsenal couldn't find an agreement with Crystal Palace, an agreement that suited both parties in the sense that the club would get what they want. But, Palace obviously in the Premier League, survival is key. And if you do get relegated from the Premier League, I think the financial implications are far bigger than if you was to drop down from a foreign league, let's say, just because the TV money is so big in the Premier League. So Palace wanted it up front, weren't going to happen. Arsenal turned to this alternative, but my word, what an alternative. How do you think that Unai Emery will fit Pepe, Lacazette, Aubameyang, and possibly even Ozil in the same team next season?
Again, it's another question. I tweeted a little team out the other day. I set it up as 4-2-3-1. I do think that's how he will look to play a lot next season. I know we had three at the back a lot last season. That was almost a case of needs must, I think. I mean, the team I got here was obviously you got Leno in goal. Then if you were to include Tierney, you have Bellerin when he's fit, obviously, and Tierney's the fullbacks. We don't know what's going to happen at centre half. But then in front of that is where it gets exciting. I mean, you've got any two could go in there from Torreira, Xhaka, obviously. Caballo, there's the whole list of them. But then in front of that is the exciting time, isn't it? So I went for Aubameyang left, Ozil in the middle, and Pepe on the right with Lacazette up front on his own. I mean, even if that's not it, even if it's slightly tweaked, that's scary to some teams, isn't it? Especially if those three can get the best out of Ozil. If Ozil can hit the ground running this season, he's due a good season, isn't he? You almost think maybe he owes the fans a good season because he has been so inconsistent, but you surround him with these type of players and hopefully he can shine.
Absolutely. Mark, we've not spoken before. This is your first time on the podcast. I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on Unai Emery's first season. I kind of get a little bit of criticism when I highlight some areas in which I feel he could have done better. I'm not saying that, I expected him to come in and turn the club around instantly, but I do feel there were opportunities last season, opportunities that were missed. How did you assess Unai Emery's first campaign at the Arsenal?
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you. I mean, if we look at it, they were essentially 2 games away from getting their target, which was getting back into the Champions League. Obviously, the less said about the Europa League final, but the better. But if you also missed out by a point behind Spurs, of course, for the top 4, when you look at the running and the results they had, they were dreadful results. I mean, that Crystal Palace game, the team he picked for that was unforgivable, wasn't it? When you think a result in that would have taken them back to the Champions League. I think there's more positives than negatives for sure. I think earlier in the season he seemed to struggle. He was praised massively for being able to make match-winning substitutions or changes that affected the game. But then you actually think after a while, well, he's putting himself in a position where he's having to make those changes. So, if you are this top manager, you should not have to make those changes, if that makes sense. You should have the team out there that you think can win. Agreed. But then the way he handled like the Ozil situation, he wasn't going to be bullied into playing Ozil every week. I think that's fair. I think he dealt with everything very well. Then, things like losing Aaron Ramsey and not being able to sign any players in January on permanent deals are things that are out of his hands. So it's a mixed bag. Like I say, 2 results away, arguably from a major trophy and a return to the Champions League. He needs to improve on that this year, doesn't he? And he's certainly been given ample amount of signings and money to do that this year.
Absolutely. Nicolas Pepe spoken of, the fact that Alex Lacazette, Aubameyang, Ozil, he's mentioned Ozil as well in his interview, talking about the players that kind of made him want to join Arsenal. He's clearly got a decent relationship with Lacazette and Aubameyang already. They've been on social media doing, his sort of pose thing, trying to get, drum up some interest before this deal was announced. But it's good to know, isn't it, as an Arsenal fan, that we can still pull top players. Despite the fact that we've been out the Champions League for going into our third season now, to know that we can still go out and get the top players in Europe and that the top players in Europe want to play for this club is a real positive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every Arsenal fan has a right to be excited by this window. But as you say, you've signed a striker and a central defender who are 18 years old and are very much for the future. Pepe's the first one, really. There's the permanent deal that other teams wanted. That and they've also not had to chuck hundreds and hundreds of £1,000s a week at him in wages. If you're led to be believed, it'll be slightly over 100,000, which isn't in this day and age isn't lots, is it? So I think the pull of playing with those attacking players in particular, and for a club where the French players in particular, even players from the Ivory Coast, have had a great history. I mean, on the statement on the website, he talks specifically about Kolo Touré, who was part of the Ivory Coast setup for the African Cup of Nations, and he'd spoken to him about it and got a glowing review. So things like that have to be taken into account, don't they? And I think, like you said, we've said many times already, you just hope now it's a good fit and he can hit the ground running.
Absolutely. And just touching on that statement that's on the website regarding Kolo Touré, he says, Kolo Touré was with us on the Ivory Coast national squad as an assistant coach. He spoke to me a lot about the very high level, how he got to Arsenal and how you always have to work hard and really graft on a daily basis to try and get right to the very top. Touré, Eboué and Gervinho are the major players from the Ivory Coast. We talk a lot about Gervinho, for example, who played for Lille and ended up at Arsenal. So I am on the same path. They are definitely examples to us young Ivorians, and I hope we will continue to follow these examples. So Nicolas Pepe saying all the right things. Fingers crossed he hits the ground running and Arsenal can, get back into the Champions League, because that's what it's all about, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Well, fingers crossed he's better than Gervinho. Let's be brutally honest. But it's good to have those people that you can talk to. It's a step up in, not just a step up in class, but it's a step up in the amount of attention that's going to be on him. You look at the stats. Not only is he Arsenal's record signing, but he's the most expensive player ever to leave Ligue 1. He's the most expensive African footballer of all time, which when you look at some of the players that are around in that neck of the woods, you've got Salah and Mane, for example, up for the FIFA Best Award. But this guy, they've, in terms of transfer fees, blown them out of the water. So there's going to be pressure on him. He's still a relatively young guy. So yeah, it will be interesting in those opening weeks of the season just to see how he beds in, just to see how he kicks on, really.
Absolutely. Exciting times as Arsenal fans, exciting times. And fingers crossed we get a couple more deals over the line. Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your very, very busy day to join me. Do you want to let our listeners know how they can follow you on Twitter? Of course, yeah.
Happy to join you to talk about things that are positive, that's for sure. Maybe we'll be doing it again later in the season. I'm just at Marky M. Bryans on Twitter. So, yeah, a bit of banter and a bit of Arsenal news on there. So, yeah, it'd be good to catch up with people.
Great stuff. That brings us to the end of this special edition of the podcast. Like I said, it's our third bit of content today, and we've got another bit of content coming to you guys this evening. It's our live fans phone-in between 9 and 10 p.m. I'll be taking your calls live on YouTube. It will be live on Twitter, live on Facebook too, so you'll be able to join us, and of course it's available as a podcast the next morning. So if you want to talk about the Pepe signing or anything else Arsenal related, feel free to come and join us. We'll be back very, very soon. This is a Sofa Sports Media production. Follow us on Twitter at Sofa Sports Media. Subscribe to our Premier League show by searching for Sofa Sports Media on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you download them from. Join the Sofa Sports Media family to enjoy lots of exclusive content for the 2019-20 season. Sofa Sports Media. Subscribe, enjoy, and join the discussions.